Welcome, my friends, wherever you are, nestled beneath blankets, gently rocking in your chair, or simply gazing at the darkened ceiling above. I invite you now to breathe deeply. Let go of the day's noise, the blinking notifications, the hurried thoughts. For the next while, nothing is required of you but rest and a gentle curiosity. This is Sleepy Epic, where history is told not with blaring trumpets, but with quiet footsteps on soft earth, and stories drift like candle smoke through the corridors of time. If you find solace here, in these whispered windows into the past, I'd be so grateful if you gently tap the like button, or leave a quiet comment about what you feel, or even subscribe to this channel. Each one is like a lantern lit along this peaceful path, guiding more weary travelers to join us. And now, as the stars blink gently overhead and the hush of night settles like a velvet cloak over the world, let us step away from our own age, from glowing screens and noisy rooms, and into the quiet folds of the past. We travel not into the chambers of kings or the bloody fields of war, but along winding paths, through the gardens of monasteries and the smoky hearths of peasant homes, into the world of those whose stories are rarely told, the quiet ones, the misunderstood, those who moved differently, spoke less or not at all, and saw the world through a lens we still fail to fully understand. Imagine a boy who never spoke, and a bishop who taught him two simple words. Picture a friar who gave away everything he had, not out of confusion, but conviction. Envision a lone herder who understood every animal in his care, but found human speech unnecessary. These are not merely sweet vignettes. They are fragments of truth, tucked like pressed flowers between the pages of history. Tonight, we begin a journey, not toward answers, but toward presence. Not to correct the past, but to notice it with a more generous gaze. This is a story about how the Middle Ages, with all its shadows and flickers of light, may have seen, sheltered, and even embraced those we now recognize as autistic. Their names may be lost, but their echoes remain. So lay your head softly now. Let your breath grow slower, deeper. Let the fire in your imagination begin to glow. And walk with me now, gently, quietly, as we step into the world of the forgotten souls who once lived beneath the same stars as you. We travel first to the damp, green hills of early medieval England. Night lingers gently over the land. Mist curls along low ridges, and in the distance, a thatched cottage breathes smoke into the dark, starlit air. Inside, a mother hums softly, tucking her child beneath a worn wool blanket. Her eldest son sits quietly, whittling wood by the hearth. He has never spoken, yet his eyes dance with the flame, silent, but filled with wonder. Beyond the cottage lies a small monastery. Candles flicker as monks finish their final psalm. One novice lingers by the window. His name will not appear in any manuscript, but tonight, Brother Cadman hums a melody only he understands, watching sheep rest in the valley below. His silence is not emptiness, but presence. Now drift with me southward, where forests stretch wide and deep. Along a crumbling Roman road walks a girl, small and mute, gently tapping her walking stick to an inner rhythm. Each step is quiet, yet sure, an unnoticed song woven into the tapestry of time. In a nearby orchard, a friar scatters crumbs for sparrows, his only wealth. He whispers a prayer into the morning wind, his kindness etched into the silence. None will write of him. Still, the birds remember. Let the day pass softly. Along a hillside path, a herder leads goats with a reed whistle carved by moonlight. He speaks little, yet to the animals he says everything. Villagers call him strange. The flock calls him home. By the cliffs, a hooded woman reads from a hand-copied book. The letters are uneven, yet each word is spoken with devotion, sent out on sea wind like a prayer without destination. Her voice fades into the surf, but its quiet strength lingers. In a village square, a shy puppeteer gives life to cloth animals. His words fail him, but his hands speak fluently through velvet and string. Years later, children will recall the way those puppets danced, though they'll forget the man who made them. These are the quiet ones, not saints or legends, but flickers of presence in the long night of the past. They lived by instinct, by kindness, by rhythms we are only beginning to understand. Their names may be lost, but their light endures hidden, soft and steady. So close your eyes now. Feel the stillness return. Beneath stars and stories, let your breath grow slower. You are not alone in the quiet. They are here still, and we shall meet them again, soon. When the first full tale begins. Until then, rest. Our first tale begins in the 8th century, in a village nestled in the damp greenness of early medieval England. There, among mossy stones and the scent of wood smoke, lived a boy. He was 9 years old and had never spoken. He would sit for hours, utterly still, watching the rain trickle in uneven paths down the cottage wall. His fingers often hovered over the wooden table, tracing shapes that no one else could see, spirals and loops, perhaps stars, or perhaps nothing at all. He did not answer when called. He did not meet the eyes of the other children, nor join their muddy games. He did not laugh when others laughed. Some villagers, with all the compassion of a bag of turnips, claimed the boy was possessed, or worse, useless. Others, with slightly more imagination, said his mind was lost somewhere far away, like a lamb that had wandered past the hedgerow. But his mother, oh, his mother, she knew better. She was a woman built of silence and strength, of cracked palms and lullabies hummed low in the dark. She had seen how the boy flinched at sudden noises, how he smiled, gently, barely, when birds swooped close to the thatch, how he rocked in place when overwhelmed by too many feet, too many voices, too much everything. She never tried to force him into words. Instead, she listened with her eyes. She read his silences like scripture. And she loved him not despite his quietness, but within it. One spring day, news came with the wind and the hooves. A bishop was passing through. Not just any bishop, but John, later to be known as St. John of Beverly. A man said to be so holy he could bless the frost off your boots. The village did what villages always do when a holy man comes. They baked too much bread, sang too loudly, and tried to remember how to look pious. But the mother, she did not bake. She did not sing. She simply wiped her hands on her apron, took her son by the hand, and waited. When the bishop arrived, the people crowded forward. Some bowed, some wept, some probably hoped for a free miracle. But the bishop's gaze passed over the crowd like candlelight, and landed still and gentle on the boy. The boy stared back, not with fear, not with joy, simply presence, as though seeing someone not for the first time, but after a long silence. John stepped forward, no fanfare, no trumpet, just dusty robes and calm eyes. He knelt, he whispered a prayer, Latin trailing like incense into the morning air. Then, with the patience of a man who knew time did not belong to him, he began to speak. Gia, he said softly. Yes. Nia, he said, even softer. No. Again, and again, and again. The boy watched. His lips twitched, moved, formed the shape. A whisper came. Gia. The mother's breath caught in her throat. The villagers leaned closer. A pig snorted somewhere in the background, entirely unimpressed. Nia, the boy said. Firmer this time. There was no miracle proclaimed, no angels descending. Just the bishop's smile, small and satisfied. He rose and turned to his companions. A handful of priests and deacons, worn from travel but with eyes still soft, and gave the boy into their care. They would teach him, the bishop said, not fix him. Teach him, and so the boy did not go home. He went to the monastery. There, among the walled gardens and the bees and the slow toll of the bell, he found rhythm. The monks gave him a corner in the garden to tend. He learned the names of herbs, not for their magic, but for their smells, their textures. He learned to trace letters. He sang psalms under his breath. He did not speak much, but he listened, and he was not alone. Not every story in the Middle Ages ends in fire and madness. Some, just a few, end in dirt under fingernails, warm bread, and quiet understanding. And perhaps that's a kind of miracle too. The abbey walls were not tall, just enough to keep wandering. Sheep and wayward gossip outside, but to the boy they felt like the quiet rim of a seashell. Inside them the world calmed. Breezes unfurled more gently, and every sound quill on vellum, finch on yew branch, gong of the prayer, bell arrived softened, as though the very air had been laid under goose down. Brother Godric, the infirmarian, became the boy's first guide. Godric smelled perpetually of thyme and lanolin. His beard, flecked white as wood ash, trembled when he chuckled. One dawn he pressed a wooden spade into the boy's hands and pointed to a weed-strangled corner by the south wall. "This patch is yours," he said, as though bestowing a fiefdom. "Listen to it, and it will teach you how to care for it." So the boy sank bare fingers into loam. He did not speak, but earth spoke to him in grains and coolness, in the slow wheeling of worms beneath the surface. Days lengthened into weeks. Nettles yielded to neat rows of pennyroyal, rue, and lavender. When he watered them at vespers, dusk painted the garden violet, and bees, sluggish with twilight, brushed his sleeves like drifting prayers. One rain-heavy afternoon, Brother Gloored, keeper of the scriptorium, noticed the boy's habitual spirals traced on dusty benches. Gled beckoned him to a long oak table where parchment lay like winter fields awaiting seed. With a reed pen he drew a simple half-moon stroke. "This is a," he whispered, voice no louder than parchment turning. "Every letter is a path. Walk it slowly." Ink spread in feathered threads. The boy's eyes widened, as if watching frost flower across a window. Weeks turned to months, and the alphabet unfurled under his hand. B curved like a bean tendril, D rose like a shepherd's crook, S slipped like trout through water. He discovered that when he exhaled just before each stroke, his line steadied writing became a kind of breathing dot at last. Glorad guided his fingers to spell a single word. Pax, peace. The boy mouthed it silently, feeling the shape linger on his lips long after ink dried. Benedictine bells marked time the way constellations mark sky. Matins before dawn, lauds with first rose light, prime as crows lifted from the meadow. The boy learned to measure not minutes, but hushes between bell strikes. Soon the choir master noticed how he rocked in subtle rhythm during psalms, that his chest vibrated when deep voices merged under stone arches. One winter night, a novice's voice cracked on the Magnificat. Silence threatened to unravel the hymn until a clear, low tone rose from the back pew. It slipped into the vacancy and bore the melody forward like a lone lantern-bearer on a dark road. Monks turned. It was the boy, eyes half closed, hand tapping the pew rail in small circles. He did not know all the Latin yet, but notes are older than words. They welcomed him into the choir, not with ceremony, but by simply leaving a space for him on the bench every compline. On his 15th name day, the abbot asked, "Child, what shall we call you in the register?" A man must meet himself by name, sooner or later. The boy thought of the spirals he had drawn since toddlerhood, the way they coiled inward yet reached outward, like fern fronds and galaxies. From some quiet river inside came a breath-shaped answer. Sidwall. 2 syllables, soft but steady. The brothers nodded as though they had always known. The abbot wrote it carefully between Sedmund and Senric in the roll. Sedwallus, oblate. The year ravens nested early, and snow melted too soon. The abbot received a letter sealed with green wax. Relics of Saint Ida were to be carried north for safekeeping. 3 monks were ordered to escort them. Brother Gloored volunteered, bringing his pupil along. Travel would teach, he argued, what parchment could not. They set out along chalk roads bordered by gorse and yellow flame. Sidwall shouldered a satchel of herbs, lavender, yarrow, dried marigold to comfort pilgrims they met, A woman with swollen joints, a smith's child with night fevers. He never spoke, but his salves murmured for him. Markets were harder, spinning wheels clacked. Geese shrieked underarm. Drunkards' laughter burst like stones on glass. Noise tangled his thoughts into brambles. When it grew too thick, he crouched by a well or hedge, covering his ears, rocking until rhythms returned to regular tide. Bread stood sentinel, offering. No words, only shared stillness. That too was teaching. At a manor house, the steward's daughter lay clogged with winter cough. Blood letters hovered with leeches. Sidwall shook his head delicate but firm. Nia. He mixed elderflower, licorice, honey. Steamed it beneath linen. Dawn found the girl sleeping easy, pulse no longer galloping. The steward offered coin. Sidwall guided his hand instead to the alms coffer for orphans. A lesson passed wordlessly. Early one Advent, rumors poured like black pitch. Dragon-proud ships had raided Lindisfarne. Monks slain, gospel pages scattered across blood, wet sand. Fear billowed southward with the smell of smoke. The abbey barricaded gates. Novices stacked barrels behind doors. Sidwall chose the garden wall as his post. He crouched among withered bean stalks, palms flat on cold stone, feeling how wind vibrated through mortar. Raiders never came, turned back perhaps by a sudden squall. But brothers remembered the silent shape on the rampart, how even fear seemed to hush around him. Brother Glured's eyesight dulled like old pewter. He surrendered his current manuscript, a herbal in trembling hands, to Sidwall. The young monk worked by dawn slant and by rush light, grinding malachite, orpiment, and soot. Yet he added what no exemplar demanded: bees. Tiny gold leaf bees nested among painted rosemary. A single spiral coiled in every margin, echo of childhood weather tables. At the chapter on Rosmarinus, Sidwall inked a bee poised mid-flight, wings edged with silver. At Lavandula, 3 bees circled like sensing thuribles. When the codex closed at last, Glured slid gnarled fingers across the cover. "In silence you have built a cathedral of color," he whispered. Spring and swallows stitched blue sky over Beverly, where Bishop John now lay aged and frail. He sent for Sidwall, asking only to hear once more the voice that had healed a psalm so many years before. Sidwall sang the Nunc Dimittis, "Lord, let your servant depart in peace." The old man's breath grew even. A smile folded like parchment. Corners, before dawn he slipped away, leaving a hush that rustled chapel candles. Sidwall stayed through the funeral vigil. At the grave he laid a beeswax taper and the finished herbal. Then, on impulse, he whispered a third word newborn and tremulous upon his tongue: "Pax." His voice wavered, but the word rang clear. As the abbey bell, "Peace." In later years, novices flocked to learn his hand. Sidwall spoke still in fragments, yes, no, peace, but his demonstrations carried paragraphs. He timed brushstrokes to heartbeats, invited students to exhale before. Curves. Some found the practice strange, yet even the clumsiest quills soon glided like swans across vellum. Children from the village aimed barefoot to the outer garden wall. He gave them scraps of scraped parchment, berry juice pigments, and taught them to paint the summer sky in layered blues. Their giggles tangled with bees hummed 2 musics in one cloister. The summer he turned 30, hail gutted the barley crop. Famine loomed. Sidwall organized seed exchange among surrounding farms, traveling with pack goats. He bartered herbs for grain, grain for cheese, ever trading upward until barns were not full, but not empty either. Some called it a miracle. He just placed a palm on the nearest gatepost and felt the wood's reassurance. Yes, Gia. Decades spun past like wheel ruts, filling with rain, then drying, filling, drying. Sidwall's beard silvered. His hands remained steady. One clear morning, hearing the first autumn geese, he sensed an inner bell striking its last hour. He asked, brothers to carry him to the apiary. Sun pooled honey gold on straw skep lids. Bees drifted, slow as snowflakes. Sidwall traced a spiral in dust, smaller, smaller, until it vanished at the center. He breathed "Pax" one more time, a sigh that sounded almost like wings, and stilled. They buried him beneath the pear tree he had grafted years before. No up-tilted statues, only a flat river stone chiseled with a simple loop, the path he had been walking since childhood, returning at last to its quiet heart. Monks carried his herbal to Canterbury, where scholars puzzled over the meaning of its hidden spirals. Sailors later bore a copy to Ireland, where illuminators copied the bees with childlike delight. Centuries on, a curator in London would trace the coiling margin and note in her diary, "Unknown hand, 8th century. Illumination hums one feels the page breathing." She could not know the boy who had breathed that hum into ink, nor that his 3 words Gia, Nia, Pax, still circled like bees round every curious mind that bent to rest upon that page. Now, dear friend reclining in lamplight or beneath quilted night sky, let these echoes settle around you. Imagine cool earth between your fingers, the hush before a bell, the hush after. Remember that a single whispered yes can open a lifetime. That a firm but gentle no can protect a fragile soul. That peace, when finally spoken, gilds the air like pollen, light enough to ride any breeze. Close your eyes. Hear bees hum somewhere beyond the walls of your own hurried day. They keep their perennial vigil, turning sunlight into sweetness. Between their wing beats resides a silence older than kingdoms. Silence that welcomed one small boy and taught him to shape his life in quiet loops of meaning. May that same stillness find you now and carry you softly toward sleep. Good night. Pax. Now we turn the page of time to 13th century Italy, to sunlit fields where the wind carries. The scent of rosemary and the bells of distant cloisters echo like slow ripples on water. It is here, beneath the terracotta rooftops of Assisi, that we meet Brother Juniper. Juniper was not like the others. He gave too much. If someone complimented his tunic, he would take it off his back and press it into their hands, regardless of whether modesty or whether it was his only one. If a beggar looked hungry, and to Juniper, they all looked hungry, he would hand over the friary's entire meal, pots and all. Sometimes he forgot orders halfway through completing them. Other times he wandered off mid-conversation, lost in thought or wonder or something in between. But Francis loved him. "Would that I had a forest of such junipers," he once sighed, with a kind of amused reverence. Juniper, in many ways, lived with the clarity and chaos of someone who saw the world through a simpler, sharper lens. He didn't worry about appearances, or the social pecking order of friars, or whether giving away all their supplies meant someone would have to walk 2 towns over for more beans. His world was clean in its logic: love God, love people, give what you have, the rest, details. Perhaps today, he might be recognized as autistic, but in his time, he was a fool for God, and that was no insult. It was a peculiar form of reverence, given to those who lived outside the bounds of worldly sense, but within the embrace of divine purpose. His days followed a rhythm that suited him well. Bells rang, prayers rose. Meals came and went with comforting predictability. He swept floors with quiet intensity, chopped wood like it might save a soul, and tended to the sick with a wordless patience that made even the skeptical pause. Yes, he baffled the more practical friars. Yes, he disrupted their attempts at order. But Juniper's oddness was not mocked. It was watched, tolerated, sometimes secretly envied. Because while others fussed about theological debates or proper robe folding, Juniper simply loved, without calculation, without pride, without exhaustion. There's a tale, half legend, half monastery gossip, that Juniper once cut off the foot of a pig to feed a sick man who was craving pork. When asked why, Juniper calmly explained that the pig had many feet and surely wouldn't mind. The farmer, it is said, disagreed. But when St. Francis heard the story, he laughed not with mockery, but with wonder. "Ah," he said, "Juniper has done it again." Juniper's logic, while not suited for managing friary budgets, had its own brilliance. He saw suffering and responded. He saw need and gave. He didn't worry about what was too much, a concept that never quite made sense to him anyway. In a world that so often demanded conformity, Juniper was a holy disruption. And instead of forcing him to change, those around him slowly adjusted. Not always perfectly, not always patiently, but enough. He lived many years, never rising in rank, never preaching great sermons, but he was remembered and loved. Perhaps there's something to be learned in that. Not every soul is meant to lead armies or pen philosophies. Some are meant to sweep the floor with grace, to give away their last crust of bread with a smile, and to remind the rest of us that being human doesn't always mean making sense. Sometimes it means making space. And Juniper, sweet, wild. Juniper left space for God, for people, and unknowingly, for generations to come to understand that difference does not mean defect. It might just mean devotion in disguise. The rooftops of Assisi glowed like old coins the morning Juniper first awoke in the little friary. Summer light spilled through an open shutter and pressed warm shapes onto the straw-filled mattress. Outside, swifts sketched quick black arrows in the sky. Olive groves rustled with lazy wind. Juniper rose before the bell, feet bare on cool flagstone. He hummed a tune no one taught him, half psalm, half childhood lullaby, and padded to the well. The rope creaked. Water mirrored a sliver of moon still pale in dawn. He whispered Deo Gratias and poured the bucket over his head, shocking shoulders into alert joy. By the time the others stirred, he had already swept the courtyard, refilled oil lamps, and set a bowl of figs on the refectory table, each fruit polished on his sleeve until it shone like stained glass amber. This was Juniper, a man whose prayers were verbs, whose liturgy was simply doing the next kind thing. In the months that followed, the friars discovered an unexpected rhythm. Each evening they took stock of their goods, and each dawn they discovered half of them gone spirited away into the hands of strangers. Brother Angelo kept ledgers. Every red line of deficit pulsed like a vein in his forehead. "We had 4 new blankets last night," he grumbled, flipping pages. "Now we have none." Juniper smiled, crumbs of barley bread in his beard. 4 cold bodies are warm today, he offered, as though stating sunrise. He could not grasp why this explanation inflamed Brother Angelo further. Numbers for Juniper were like gnats buzzing irritants best ignored so one might hear the river. The most famous incident began, innocently enough, with a sick tanner named Matteo, who had not eaten in days and whispered through cracked lips that he longed for roast pork. Juniper nodded solemnly, as though Matteo had requested nothing stranger than a cup of water. He set off down a dusty lane until he reached a meadow where a stout black pig snuffled among acanthus leaves. Patting the creature's bristled head, he murmured thanks, produced a small knife, and quick and deft, took one hind foot. The pig squealed, flailed, then trotted off on 3 legs, more shocked than harmed. Blood dotted Juniper's habit, but he walked back whistling. He roasted the foot with wild fennel and garlic, carried it to Matteo, and watched in wide-eyed delight as the man devoured every shred. Matteo slept that night, fever broken, cheeks pink with returning strength. Trouble, of course, arrived at dawn. The farmer burst into the friary courtyard, roaring about beastly monks and maimed livestock. Brother Angelo tried to negotiate, wave of ledger pages flapping like doves in distress. Juniper only bowed, sincerely perplexed. "But good sir," he began, "your swine yet lives, yes?" And Matteo almost died. This moral geometry did not appease the farmer, who demanded restitution. or he'd haul the culprit before the bishop. Word reached Francis. He arrived from the hillside chapel of San Damiano, sandals dusty, eyes bright with a compassion that could set flint afire. First, he paid the farmer coins, apologies, promises of new piglets. Then he sought Juniper, who waited in the herb garden, pruning marjoram. "Brother," Francis asked, voice equal parts sigh and song, "why did you not simply ask the farmer?" "First," Juniper thought. Shears paused mid-air. "Father, when a man is drowning, we do not negotiate for the lifeboat." Matteo was drowning in hunger. Francis closed his eyes and laughed full-throated, river deep, not mockery. "Marvel, would that I had a forest of such junipers," he repeated, shaking his head. After that, Francis instructed all friars to escort Brother Juniper on errands involving animals, produce, or anything with an owner. It helped exactly as much as a reed helps a flood. One crisp November morning, a duchess stopped in Assisi en route to Perugia. She knelt in the basilica, pearls flashing beneath a silvery veil. Juniper, sweeping the nave, noticed her shiver. Without pause, he draped his patched wool cloak around her shoulders, then returned to work in his worn tunic, oblivious to the shocked gasps echoing against marble. When she rose, attendants fussed, but she silenced them, fingers caressing the frayed fabric as if it were cloth of gold. Tears rimmed her lashes, quiet grief no court musician would ever sing of. That evening she sent messengers with bolts of velvet and a purse of florins. Juniper refused them all. "The gift is complete," he insisted. But Francis accepted on the friary's behalf and redirected the florins to repair leaky roofs in a plague-stricken hospice. Word reached the Duchess weeks later. She smiled, understanding at last that the cloak's true weight was not wool but ripple. Not all friars were amused. Brother Prudenzio drafted a list headed, "Guidelines for Brother Juniper so that charity may coexist with common sense." It included such exhortations as, obtain permission before gifting communal goods, confine almsgiving to designated hours, retain at least one personal garment at all times. Juniper read the list politely, nodding. The next day, he gave the parchment to a beggar who needed paper for kindling. Brother Prudenzio tore at his hair. Francis, seeing the tug of war between rule and freedom, gathered the community beneath a fig tree. "We are many organs in one body," he preached. "Prudenzio is our careful eye, Juniper our beating heart. Let neither despise the other." The eye blinked, the heart beamed. Peace, at least for a season, settled like pollen upon them all. Pilgrims often stopped at Assisi en route to Rome. One spring, Francis sent Juniper and Brother Massio to accompany a blind beggar that far, a journey of 5 days over rolling Umbrian hills. Massio fretted supplies, 2 loaves, 1 wineskin, 6 apples. Juniper nodded, listening with half an ear while tracing dust spirals along the road. On day 2, they paused in a market square. A mother with twin infants begged milk. Juniper offered their wineskin of goat milk, Massio's careful ration, without thinking. He handed an apple to each twin. Massio clutched his empty satchel, seeing starvation on the horizon. "Brother, we will perish." Juniper shrugged, pointing skyward. "Does not our Father feed sparrows?" That night, an innkeeper, beholding their blind companion, insisted they lodge free and served warm broth. Massio ate in trembling awe, half anger, half gratitude. He would later record in his journal, "Traveling with Juniper is like walking behind the wind. One arrives nourished but never knows how." The road to Rome crossed the leper colony of Santa Maria degli Angeli. Long before they reached it, sour, sweet whiffs of decay drifted on wind. Many travelers quickened their pace, faces averted. Juniper slowed. A man nose eaten away, sat alone, ragged breaths scraping his chest. Juniper knelt, offered water. Then, seeing that the man's cloak was crusted to his wounds, He tugged gently until fabric tore free. Maceo gagged. Juniper raised the soiled cloth to his lips and kissed it, eyes soft as dusk. "Brother," he said to Maceo later, washing his own hands in a creek, "sickness cannot cling to love." That night, far from campfires, Maceo wept into folded sleeves, tears of dread that slowly warmed into tears of mercy. Juniper slept under vines, untroubled by philosophy. Near Rome, the group encountered a hunting party. Hounds, banners, hawks hooded in scarlet. The prince, curious at their ragged procession, asked what gift they might bear him from St. Francis. Juniper rummaged in his pouch, produced a single walnut. "Inside this shell," he declared, "lies a forest." The prince laughed. Amused, pocketed the walnut. Later, so the story goes, he planted it in his rose garden on a whim. In years to follow, a walnut tree did grow, crooked, vigorous roots breaking through marble walkways. Servants complained, but the prince, now old and often lonely, would sit beneath its shade and recall the fool who spoke forests into shells. Back home, Juniper's fame had spread. Pilgrims jostled to glimpse him, as if sainthood radiated visible light. Juniper simply offered them bread. When supplies ran low, he baked new loaves shaped like open hands gesture captured in crust. Some called them miracle loaves, though flour, water, yeast, and laughter were the only ingredients. Brother Angelo discovered that when they planned to give, they never lacked. The ledger began, mysteriously, to balance, not through frugality, but through ebb and flow. For every cloak given away, 2 arrived from some distant widow. For every coin handed to a beggar, 3 clinked later into the alms box. Like a spring beneath stone, providence rose wherever Juniper's footsteps pressed. Slowly the friary culture shifted. Meals grew simpler, conversations kinder. Novices learned that obedience did not mean silence of the heart, but harmony with it. And in the gift of one man's transparent oddity, others found permission to be humbly, joyfully strange in their own small ways. When Francis himself weakened, under the weight of wounds and fevers, Juniper became his quiet shadow. He fetched water, tucked blankets, sang snatches of plainsong when pain tightened around Francis like iron. One moonless night, Francis whispered, "Tell me, little brother, why are you not afraid?" Juniper sat cross-legged at the foot of the cot, considering. At length he touched the wooden floor and said, "This is firm." He touched his own chest. "These beats." He gestured toward the curtained window where wind hissed. "That moves." Then, palms open, he shrugged, as if to say fear had no crevice in such dependable company. Francis smiled, tears glistening. Pain did not retreat, but its sting softened under the balm of presence. 2 weeks later, when the Poverello slipped into his final silence, Juniper was there, fingers lightly counting the last rises of his chest. At the final exhale, he whispered only, "Grazie," as though Francis had merely handed him another walnut of possibility. Leadership of the order passed to others. They left Juniper in charge of the orchard work, perfectly suited to a soul who trusted seeds. Each spring he grafted new varieties, tying twigs with strips of old habit. He spoke to trees the way some converse with saints, calling them sorrel sisters. Travelers described a stooped friar among blossoms, hands moving like small white birds while wind carried fragments of conversation meant for leaves alone. Children from town visited, pockets round with stones. Juniper taught them to skip pebbles across the cloister pool, humming rhythms for each splash. He never scolded when stones flew wild. He simply guided aim anew. In time, those children grew shoemakers, scribes, mothers, soldiers, but all remembered the pool, the humming, the permission to try again. In his 60th year, Juniper chose to observe Lent with complete speechlessness. For 40 days he communicated solely by gesture, a nod for yes, a hand to heart for prayer. Brother Angelo, still keeper of ledgers, feared chaos, but discovered that without Juniper's words, the man's deeds spoke even louder. Bread still vanished into hungry palms, yet loaves also multiplied on the sill every dawn. On Palm Sunday, Juniper finally broke silence. He entered Mass carrying not a frond but the battered ledger itself. Kneeling at the altar, he laid the book down, open to a page where debits and credits at last balanced to zero. He whispered only 2 words, Dio nulla. Oh God, nothing. Then he smiled, as if hearing distant laughter in heaven's gallery. Winter returned, sharp as new nails. Juniper's joints ached. Breath rattled. Yet he joined the novices shoveling snow from the portico. At twilight he collapsed, leaning against the warm flank of the bakery oven. Brothers carried him to the infirmary where he lingered 3 days. At dawn on the 4th, snow drifting through cracked shutters, he asked for 2 things, water and his pruning knife. They pressed the handle into his palm. He turned it over, tracing wood grain, then offered it back. Plant, he whispered, voice papery. Olive, south wall. That was all. When they bent to ask where exactly, he had already gone eyes half open, as if still watching branches move in breeze only, he could see. Spring thaw revealed his last request. In the tool shed they found a single olive pit, cleaned, wrapped in cloth. Brother Angelo, tears thick as resin, planted it by the south wall. Seasons wheeled. The pit sprouted, rooted, grew. Today, an olive tree stands there, trunk twisted like strands of rope, branches flung wide as a blessing. In lean years, its fruit feeds dozens, in plenty, hundreds. Locals call it l'albero del matto santo, the tree of the holy fool. So gentle. Friend, let dusk gather around your own room. Hear a distant bell, perhaps a car horn, perhaps imagination fold into the hush. Let Juniper's odd luminous charity seep like evening fragrance through the cracks of your day. Remember, some will measure life by profit or proof. Others, by how swiftly they answer a need. The world keeps both ledgers, one inked in numbers, one in crumbs wiped from a stranger's lips. Which ledger you choose to balance is a quiet decision made again each morning. And should your giving seem foolish, recall the walnut in the prince's garden, the cloak around a duchess's grief, the pig that trotted on 3 legs so a dying man might taste hope. Juniper's logic was not of columns, but of currents love. Outflowing, provision returning by paths unseen. That logic is yours to inherit. Close your eyes now. Picture terracotta roofs cooling under moonwash, rosemary nodding beside stone steps, and somewhere under those stars a simple friar still, sweeping the courtyard of heaven, humming his glad wandering hymn. Breathe deep. Let the scent of olives and wood smoke cradle you. And as sleep tugs gently at your thoughts, carry one small prayer on your tongue, soft, foolish, and fearless. Give. Good night and good giving. Let us move further north now, into the cold sweeping plains where reindeer walk and the wind sings through the trees. Though this story is modern, it echoes a life that might well have belonged in the Middle Ages. A grandfather, old and quiet, lived among the reindeer people, a nomadic community in the far reaches of the northern world. His tent stood at the edge of the others, pitched slightly apart, not out of arrogance, simply preference. He did not speak much. At gatherings he sat quietly, hands folded, eyes half lowered. He was not unkind, merely distant. When others sang or argued by the fire, he was likely mending a strap or stirring something quietly over his own flames. And when the wind howled and the herd shifted across the tundra, he was already moving, already there. He knew the animals better than anyone. Not just by appearance, but by gait, by rhythm, by mood. Thousands of reindeer, yet he could tell when one was missing, when one limped, when one looked tired in a way that meant trouble. He never explained how. No grand speeches, no journal of insights, just a kind of quiet certainty. His sons, respected him. His grandsons, Zhenya and young Sergei, watched him with the awe one reserves for sacred stones or ancient trees. They did not understand him fully, but they understood enough to follow. In another world, a louder world, this man might have been dismissed. Too strange, too silent, too stubborn in his routines. Perhaps he would have been sent away, or treated, or misunderstood to the point of cruelty. But here, among people who still listened to the earth and sky, who believed that solitude could be wisdom, he was honored. He passed his knowledge on without ceremony, a hand gesture, a silent walk to a ridge, a shared glance over a restless herd. The boys learned not through lectures, but by being near, by watching the watcher. His mind worked in patterns. He kept no lists, but held in memory the family tree of every reindeer across generations. Their mothers, their calves, the illnesses they'd recovered from, the spots where they liked to graze. It was not folklore. It was fact, tracked without needing to be written. There is something deeply medieval about this kind of life. Imagine a shepherd in the hills of Wales or Lombardy, alone for weeks with nothing but sheep, the stars, and their thoughts. No sermons to attend, no feast to navigate, no markets full. Oh, of shouting and barter! Just the soft bells of grazing animals and the hush of dawn. Such a person might not speak often, might not be good at trade or prayer in chorus, but they would know the land, its secrets, its shifts, its moods. They would know their flock like this grandfather knew his reindeer. And perhaps they too, in a quiet corner of the Middle Ages, found peace. Peace not in the company of people, but in the rhythms of nature. Peace in tasks repeated, in knowledge held deep and precise, in the absence of noise. Not every autistic soul in history found kindness, that is true, but some did. Some were lucky enough to be born in cultures, or corners of cultures, that valued silence. That made space for difference without demanding it be fixed. The reindeer man lived his whole life this way. His tent at the edge, his meals alone, his heart full of creatures and memory and snow. And though he never stood before crowds or wrote great things, he left a legacy, not in ink, but in footsteps, in the soft guidance of two boys who learned how to see the world a little differently. He was not broken, he was exact. And in his silence, the tundra was never alone. Dawn in reindeer country is not so much an arrival of light as a slow surrender of darkness. First, a band of pale opal wicks upward behind black spruce. Then the snow itself begins to glow, as though thousands of hidden lamps have been lit beneath the crust. On such a morning, the old man stirred in his canvas lavvu, shook frost from his fur hood, and stepped outside. He did not stretch or yawn. Habit had already arranged his muscles for the day's pattern. In one glance he counted the silhouettes of the herd dark commas on a vast white page 30, then 50 more beyond the ridge. All present. He exhaled, a single plume of satisfaction, and set about melting snow for tea. Grandsons Zhenya and Sergei, still blinking sleep from their eyes, emerged next. They followed the old man's gaze, trying to decipher what he saw in that quick survey. The small cow whose ear was torn by bramble last week, the young bull with a new antler sprout, the yearling who limped but now walked steady. The boys saw shapes, their grandfather saw stories. How does one teach knowledge that lives in pulses rather than paragraphs? The old man chose movement. When fresh snowfall muffled tracks, he led the boys to a slope where a crust had formed overnight. With his boot heel, he scraped open a small window of ice to show lichen beneath. He pointed not at the moss itself, but at the angle of the hoofprints nearby, shallow, weight evenly spread, proof the reindeer had found food and moved on unhurried. Sergei opened his mouth to ask a question, but the old man shook his head. Gently, touched finger to lips, then to ear listened first. The wind carried a low, rhythmic clicking, the tendons of reindeer ankles snapping over bone as they walked. To an untrained ear, was random. To the watcher, it was a code, cadence of health, age, mood. Genya closed his eyes, counting clicks. For a moment, he understood. That evening, as aurora curtains rippled overhead, the old man knelt by the fire with a charcoal nub and a hide scrap. He did not write letters. Those little boxes of meaning felt cramped. But he drew lines. Migration loops. River turns, feeding grounds marked with tiny spirals. Each curve corresponded to a memory. Each dot to a calving spot or salt lick or wolf den. When the map was done, he pushed it into Sergei's hands. Genya, feeling slighted, frowned. But the grandfather patted the older boy's chest. "Your map is here," the gesture said. "Trust it. Early spring in the tundra is treacherous. Warmth teases, rivers crack, then the sky gathers its breath and hurls needle-sharp ice sideways. One such storm barreled down without warning. Tents buckled like paper boats. Reindeer bolted into white oblivion. While others scrambled for ropes, the old man had already chosen a direction northeast, against the gale, toward a stand of dwarf birch where the herd would instinctively shelter. He set off alone, leaning into wind that sliced the world to two colors, white and blur. Hours later, Genya spotted a dark line returning through the spindrift. Reindeer first, grandfather behind, staff tapping rhythmic assurances. Exhausted animals pressed into the lee of the camp. People cheered. The old man merely nodded and turned to mend a ripped harness, as though saving 300 lives were all in a day's quiet work. Summer above. The Arctic Circle is a single long exhalation of light. Under midnight sun, the herd spread wide, grazing on new green. With no darkness to cue rest, children grew wild, chasing mosquitoes. Adults carved antler craft late into what should have been night. Only the old man kept rhythm. At the hour where once stars would have wheeled overhead, he sat by a silent lake, dipping hands into water chilled by glacier melt. Sergei followed. "Grandfather, why come here when it is still day?" The old man motioned for him to close eyes. Sergei obeyed. In that hush he heard faint plinks, fish nipping insects. Further still, wing beats of an owl confused by brightness. Then the click of reindeer tendons, soft but certain, across the ridge. The herd, too, sought pattern in endless day. "Night is not only dark," Sergei whispered, understanding. The old man smiled. "Predators test the seam of every ecosystem." One dusky afternoon, dusky only by the grace of cloud cover, the watcher read disturbance in the herd, a sudden bunching, heads all facing south. He snatched his staff, whistled sharp. Boys grabbed wooden rattles studded with bone discs. At the ridge they saw them, 6 wolves, coats gray as riverstone, fanning like spokes. The old man's calculations were immediate. Terrain, wind, fatigue levels of cows heavy with milk. He placed Sergei at the left flank, Genya to the right, each to shake rattles in slow tempo boom-click. Boom-click mimicking the approach of many humans. He himself walked straight toward the alpha, staff lifted, voice low in guttural chant. A confrontation of presence. The wolves, sensing mathematics turning unfavorable, melted back into heather. Only then did he lower the staff, and the boys realized their hearts were drumming the same rhythm as the rattles they held. Autumn brought longer nights. Aurora returned, veils of green and violet weaving across ink. The old man believed lights carried messages from ancestors. Seated between grandsons, he traced constellations with a finger. Here the great reindeer, there the hunter, with broken spear. Genya, half-skeptical teenager now asked, "Is it true or just story?" The old man thought, then drew 2 dots on the snow, connecting them with a line. "Story," he said at last, in a voice unused but sure, "is how truth travels." It was the most either boy had ever heard him speak. Each year, before deep freeze, elders counted herd numbers to estimate winter feed. They used charcoal tallies on driftwood. Errors could cost lives. The seasoned fog cloaked the counting ground. Figures shouted, scribbles blurred. Amid confusion, the watcher stood apart, eyes half shut, lips moving silently as reindeer trotted. Pashton Hayes. When the fog lifted, he announced a number. Others laughed too exact to be credible. They counted again. The final tally matched as precisely. No one laughed afterward. How? The head woman asked. He tapped his temple once, then pointed to the herd. Same gesture he'd shown Zhenya years before. Map in mind, stories in hooves. Time like ice, fins under pressure of seasons. The watcher's hair whitened, gait slowed. Wolves he could still face, but the weight of pens in his hands began to tremor. One September morning, he called the boys, now young men, and walked 3 hours to a rocky outcrop, overlooking the wintering valley. There he sat, back against granite, unfolding silence into instruction. How to read wind ripples in grass. How to guess snow depth by the pitch of footfalls. How to coax a frightened calf back to its mother without touch. He spoke little, yet each pause carried paragraphs. The sun dipped. He gestured for them to descend. They expected him to follow. He did not rise. Instead, he removed a bone carving from his pocket, a tiny reindeer etched with swirling patterns, and pressed it into Zhenya's palm. To Sergei he handed the charcoal hide map, a nod, go. They left him there, not out of neglect, but obedience. Elders sometimes choose their last horizon. When they returned at dawn, frost jeweled his beard. His eyes stared east with calm so complete, it seemed the landscape had simply absorbed him. They built a cairn of slate slabs, antlers crossed atop, and the wind sang through hollow tines a song none dared transcribe. Winter tightened. Zhenya and Sergei led the herd south as ice storms prowled. At first doubt gnawed. Were they turning too early, too late, too far east? Yet each decision felt steadied by unseen hand. Sometimes Sergei swore he heard a staff tapping behind him. Sometimes Zhenya dreamt of charcoal dots rearranging until dawn clarified the route. They reached winter pastures with herd intact, a feat elders hailed as blessing. Around the central fire, stories of the old watcher grew. How he counted hearts by hoofbeats, how wolves bowed to his staff, how even the sky wrote letters for him alone. But the grandsons told a simpler tale. He listened, they said, and the tundra answered. Alone by night, Sergei opened the hide map. On its edge he added 2 new spirals, echoes of those Sidwall once inked into herb margins, though Sergei knew nothing of medieval monks. Spirals, it seems, sprout wherever quiet minds map mystery. Meanwhile, far south in Umbria, olives pressed under stone still yielded oil for monastery lamps, and the walnut tree in a prince's garden cracked marble paths with stubborn roots. These lives, Sidwalls, junipers, the watchers never touched in chronology, yet their stories curved toward the same horizon, a world spacious enough for difference. A history written not only in trumpets, but in hoofbeats, bees' wings, and the hush of falling snow. Now, dear listener, close your own circle of thought. Hear the faintest jingle of reindeer bells drifting across imagination's tundra. Let the crunch of snow under slow, deliberate boots remind you that attention is a form of love, that to notice a limp in a herd of 1,000 is akin to noticing the single trembling note in a psalm or the one cold beggar in a bustling square. If the world has ever called you too quiet, too generous, too absorbed in patterns no one else perceives, remember the watcher's tent at the edge of camp, Juniper's cloak around a grieving duchess, Sidwall's spiral glowing on vellum. Their strangeness was not defect. It was compass. So breathe in, as frost sharp as you dare. Exhale slowly, letting the night widen around you. Somewhere north, under green curtains of aurora, a new watcher counts hoofbeats and writes the next chapter on the white page of snow. Somewhere south, bees murmur and cloisters echo a single word: Pax. And here, in your own quiet chest, a heart keeps steady rhythm map of footsteps yet to be taken. Good night, traveler. May your dreams walk softly beside reindeer and wake filled with the peace of silent teachers within the great stone monasteries of the medieval world, where candles flickered and quills scratched endlessly across parchment, another kind of sanctuary. Waited, one not of chance and incense, but of ink and silence. Imagine a young novice monk, quiet as snowfall, entering the scriptorium for the first time. The room is cool, even in summer. Stone walls hold the morning chill. Narrow windows let in slanted shafts of light that fall upon rows of wooden desks, each carefully arranged with parchment, ink, and quills. The air smells faintly of wax, ink, and old wool. This is not a place for idle speech. This is a place of focus, of rhythm, of breath held still. The boy, for he is still more boy than man, says nothing. He bows slightly to the elder monk overseeing the work, then takes his place. He has been assigned to copy the writings of St. Augustine. A long and difficult text, full of nuance, full of opportunities for error. Not a task given lightly. But he does not shy away. Line by line, letter by letter, he begins. The Latin flows not with speed, but with a calm precision that soon draws the notice of the elder monks. The boy's hand is steady, his script even and elegant. He copies not mechanically, but meditatively, as though the act of writing is a kind of prayer. He does not speak much to the others. When they laugh, he flinches. When the bell rings loudly for the midday meal, he winces. He eats quickly, quietly, often returning early to the scriptorium, where the silence is a balm. He struggles with eye contact, with the small talk of the cloister. But in the world of ink and margin, of structure and silence, he is not just comfortable, he is content. And more than that, he is brilliant. He notices what others miss, a misplaced mark in a centuries-old text, a subtle shift in ink where the meaning of a passage is altered. He fixes these not with flourish, but with quiet care. He begins to create not just faithful reproductions, but beauty. In the margins of his manuscripts bloom vines and birds, saints and beasts. His illumination is not flamboyant, but delicate, mathematical in its symmetry, intuitive in its flow. He measures with his eyes, not a ruler. And always, the pattern holds. He lives by the bell, matins, lauds, prime terce. The day is measured in sacred intervals, and each one gives him a kind of anchor, predictable, reassuring, holy. Other monks find him peculiar. He rarely speaks unless spoken to. He seems lost in thought at times, unmoving, as if listening to something no one else can hear. But when he writes, he is as present as any man ever was. Some whisper that he is odd. Touched, perhaps, strange, but they do not stop him, because his work is too valuable. When visitors arrive and ask who copied the Psalter with the gold-leafed margins, or who restored the ancient tractate with barely visible corrections, the answer is always the same, the quiet one. The boy with the ink-stained fingers who says little and listens much. He will never become abbot. He will never preach a sermon, but his books will outlive him. Some may survive for centuries. Some may rest now in museums, misattributed, their creator nameless, yet in each line his spirit lingers. His silence was not absence. It was presence of a different kind. Perhaps had he lived in a different age, he might have been labeled, pathologized, perhaps misunderstood. But here, in this cold stone monastery, among the quiet and the patterns and the sacred routines, he was not an anomaly. He was a scribe, and to some, he was the best they had ever known. It's easy to forget, in the blur of history, that not all lives were lived loudly, that not all gifts were wrapped in gold or power. Some were traced slowly, in ink and patience. Some souls, perhaps most especially autistic ones, thrived where silence was not empty, but structured. Not lonely, but focused. Where expectations were clear, routines predictable, and small talk blissfully absent. Asterisk in this library of silence. The boy who flinched at noise, who avoided eyes, who couldn't always find the words, found purpose. Found dignity. He found God. And when the bell rang each night for Compline, and the monks filed silently to their last prayers of the day, he followed, head bowed. Hands stained with ink, heart full. Not all saints wore halos. Some wore ink on their sleeves and parchment dust in their hair. And some of them never needed to say much at all. The first snows came early that year, drifting against cloister arches until unfamiliar white dimmed even the stained glass windows. The novice, still not yet 20, discovered another virtue. Of the scriptorium. In deepest cold, the room's thick stone kept an even, almost secret warmth. Firewood was scarce, but 30 candles burning for 8 hours raise a gentle tide of heat. 30 monks breathing softly do the rest. He arrived each dawn before matins, lantern in hand. With a stub of charcoal, he traced faint guidelines across vellum ghost rails so his letters would march true when daylight crept in. The charcoal, once brushed away, left no record, much like the young man's voice. Only those who rose equally early ever glimpsed the preparatory choreography. Ruler held lightly to avoid bruising the page. Compass pivoted to birth perfect circles, fingertip touches to gauge grain. Brother Marcus, older, near blind, began to shuffle in before sunrise as well, pretending he needed to air out the quills. Truth was, he liked the silence within the silence, the scratch of charcoal, the faint hiss of turned skin parchment. Occasionally he would murmur a single syllable of encouragement, then a before retreating so the novice's private dawn could resume. By spring, the elder librarian entrusted him with a rare treatise by Isidore of Seville, a text worm eaten at the edges. Restoration required nerve and restraint. Scrape away rot, bathe the parchment, mend with rabbit skin glue thin as breath. The novice worked 3 weeks on 2 folios, humming one of Sidwell's old psalm, tones unconsciously inherited from some forgotten manuscript whose margins bore quiet spirals. During that project he discovered a personal ritual. Before each delicate repair he whispered a 3-word litany, Gia, Nia, Pax, though he knew nothing of Sidwell or Juniper. Something in the syllables aligned his pulse to the slow beat of the task. Yes, to patience, no to haste, peace to guide his hand. Word of his skill filtered outward. An abbey 3 days' ride sent 2 brothers with a bundle of flood-soaked scrolls. A cathedral canon requested a fresh copy of the Psalms, in a hand as even as mosaic tesserae. The librarian gently refused most offers. The novice belonged first to the rule, not to commerce. Still, one request he approved, a single gospel. For a community of anchoresses whose eyes were beginning to dim. Large script, uncluttered margins, no illumination save gilded headings, clarity as charity. Not every hour passed under perfect control. One summer noon, a visiting bell ringer mistimed the great burden. Its strike shattered the midday hush like thunder in a crypt. Most scribes jerked, ink blots spoiled lines. The novice lifted, both hands, quill suspended, breath held the instant before panic. Eyes squeezed shut. 2 heartbeats, 3. Then he exhaled and impossibly set quill back to page at the exact point he'd left line unbroken. Those near him stared, ink still dripping from their own nibs. He said nothing, merely offered a small nod and invisible bow to a returning rhythm. Brother Marcus chuckled afterward. Had Gabriel blown his trumpet, he joked, our quiet one would have paused only long enough to sharpen a new quill. He rarely conversed aloud, yet an unexpected friendship grew through ink. Brother Philip, the infirmarian, often sent him scraps of parchment with tiny anatomical drawings, the curve of a rib, the branching of a rosemary stem compared to lungs. The novice responded not in words, but by embellishing Philip's sketches. with tiny vines that curled into the shapes of Greek letters denoting the four humors. Philip then added brief Latin riddles, which the scribe answered with illustrated keys disguised in decorative capitals. Months passed. They filled an entire choir with this silent correspondence. One evening, Philip placed the finished sheaf on the novice's desk. "For those," he finally spoke aloud, "whose cure is beauty rather than balm." The novice, startled by the voice, managed a shy smile. It was enough. Every decade, a bishop visited to inspect theological orthodoxy and, unofficially, to rank the abbey's artistic output. The brothers fretted. The novice simply cleaned his desk and laid out his current project, an Easter proclamation adorned with modest vines and a single phoenix rising from an acanthus leaf. The bishop stopped longer at this desk than any other. "Exquisite," he murmured, tracing the phoenix. "What price to copy my homilies thus?" The novice's shoulders tensed. He did not look up. Bargaining, small talk, these were wolves of another sort. The librarian intervened. "Your Grace," he said, "our scribe has taken a vow of parsimoniae verbi, economy of words." His answer would be silence. The bishop chuckled, but whether amused or chastened none could tell. He left a purse of coins on the desk anyway. That night the librarian divided the coins among the poor. The novice resumed his line. One might say the phoenix kept flying, as though no interruption had occurred. Late autumn wind often forced sparks down chimney flues. One such gale set ablaze a bundle of straw near the kitchen hearth. Flames lit a stack of unused parchment. Stored too close, monks rushed with buckets. Amid the chaos, the novice slipped into the smoke and retrieved, but did not unfold, a slender roll tied in faded blue ribbon. Only later did anyone learn what he'd saved, a near-lost commentary on Job, annotated by a sister house in the south. Asked why he'd chosen that particular scroll among many, he shrugged. "Blue ribbon," he whispered, voice cracked from smoke. Rare, whether instinct or divine nudge, the text survived, and scholars still footnote its unique marginal glosses. Skill is no armor against error. One winter week, weary from vigil, he miscopied a critical particle in Augustine scribing non, where nunc should stand, changing "now the soul rests" into "not the soul rests." The proofreader caught it at once and brought the page back, lips thin. The novice stared. Hands shook. For the first time he felt wavelets of heat crawl his neck. Shame. Instead of scraping the word, he backed away from the desk, folded into a kneel, head on cold flagstone. There he remained through terce, through sext, knees aching. Brother Marcus found him at none. With surprising gentleness, the elder took the younger's ink-stained hands. "Look," he said, pointing to his own manuscript, a tangle of corrections, patches, re-inked strokes. "Every mercy we copy is first practiced on ourselves." Together they trimmed a wafer of parchment, glued it over the error, re-ruled the line. When finished, the page seemed flawless save to those who knew where to feel for a slight rise-like scar tissue that testifies to healing. Not wound. News came of an anchorite sister Aldith, whose failing sight left her unable to read her beloved Psalter. The librarian asked for volunteers to produce a large format set of psalms with exaggerated script. The quiet scribe stepped forward. He devised a new hand, grand capitals, generous spacing, dots embossed under key letters, so fingers could track progress. Each psalm's first line bloomed into simple iconography: lyre, shepherd's crook, water stream allowing visual memory to aid hearing. He tested parchment textures until one offered perfect friction under fingertips. When the finished volume reached Aldith, witnesses said she spent hours just tracing the raised silent rosary of touch. She named the book her night star. The novice never met her, yet some nights, walking the cloister, he imagined her cell glowing with unheard gratitude. Plague rode a merchant caravan that winter. Within a fortnight, Coughs echoed in. Corridors. The infirmary overflowed. Philip worked to exhaustion. The young scribe, immune or merely lucky, found himself among the few still upright. When he wasn't copying last rites onto scraps for dying brothers, he carried water, soaked linens, cooled brows. During those long watches he began charting symptoms in the margins of old accounts books, small circles, lines, dots, a pattern. Emerged. Those who fell ill after third hour often succumbed. Those exposed but healthy at vespers usually survived. Philip turned the scribbles into practical policy. Isolate before sext. Allow fresh air after none. Mortality slowed. The abbot credited prayer. Philip pointed to the ink charts. The novice shrugged. Patterns speak for themselves. Years folded upon themselves like pages. The novice became simply the scribe, shoulders stooped from decades of lean, hair dusted. Like ash, one damp spring he began a book of hours commissioned for a convent newly founded across the river. He chose vellum so thin a candle could almost pierce it with light, inks ground from lapis and elderberry, and a style as spare as midnight snow. Midway through lauds on the feast of St. Luke, his hand trembled. A blot bled across a pristine margin. He set quill aside, breathing shallow. Something inside a spring wound too long finally eased. He asked Brother Marcus to escort him to the scriptorium porch where apple blossoms drifted on warm breeze. There, sitting on a low stool, he watched petals settle on his sleeves like new fallen snow, inhaled their faint sweetness, and spoke one last time, voice barely wind. Pax scripta est. Peace has been written. Then his head dipped, and he was still. They buried him in the cloister garth beneath a simple stone incised with a single quill and 3 tiny dots, Gia, Nia, Pax. No eulogy thundered, only the rustle of pages as brothers held open psalters during the office of the dead. Centuries blurred. Wars dismantled abbeys. Moths chewed bindings. Yet dozens of his books survived. In a Florentine library, a curator notes the mathematical poise of certain interlaced patterns, like snowflakes rendered in ink. In London, a specialist demonstrates raised dots in an early large print psalter, precursor to tactile reading. Neither knows the scribe's name. It lingers as colophon initials, Q for quietus perhaps, but silence keeps better than gold. Even where his pages have browned or cracked, the measured breath of his letters endures. Hold one to your ear, and you might almost hear the library of silence itself, the soft click of reindeer tendons in snow, the rustle of Juniper's cloak around a grieving duchess, the muted hum of bees above Sidwell's spiraled margins. One great hush threaded through. Centuries. Now, gentle soul listening, lower the lamp beside your bed. Picture narrow windows spilling dawn onto a desk where a single quill waits, patient, like a seed hushed in soil. Remember that greatness sometimes arrives line by quiet line, gift by quiet gift, until an unseen tapestry glows. If noise has bruised you today, retreat for a moment to that stone room. Feel the cool of walls, the predictable bell, the page accepting ink at the pace of slow breathing. Know that your own rhythms, whatever music they follow, can write beauty the world has not yet read. Breathe once more. Close the volume. Whisper. The litany the scribe carried like a lantern through every corridor of his life. Yes, no, peace. Let those 3 words guide you into sleep where lines straighten, pigments brighten, and morning waits, unhurried, on the far side of dream. Good night. The Middle Ages were not gentle. Hunger, disease, and war came often, like seasons or storms. People feared difference because difference often meant danger, illness, sin, a sign from God that something had gone wrong. And yet, within they cracks there was light. There were stories like those we've shared tonight, of quiet lives sheltered by stone walls, cloisters, forests, and herds. Of people who did not speak the way others did, or feel the world in quite the same way, and still found here and there places to belong. Sit with that a moment, if you will. Let us imagine the scene. A small fire, low in a hearth of rough stone. The kind that crackles gently, not with urgency, but like it is thinking aloud. Around it, a few travelers or monks or shepherds might sit, wrapped in cloaks, their breath visible in the cool air. You are there too, you and me. The stories we've wandered through still warm in our minds. This is not the part of the tale where we wrap everything up with a bow, no neat conclusions. Here, just reflection. The truth is, we don't know how many autistic souls lived in the medieval world. How many were praised as holy fools or dismissed as mad? How many found a life of quiet joy, and how many suffered in silence? But we do know that not all medieval lives were noisy. Not everyone had to debate theology or lead armies, or dance in great halls. There was room, not always, not everywhere, but sometimes for the ones who preferred solitude. For those who never married, who walked the edges of things. Room for the monk who wrote instead of speaking. For the friar who gave away too much. For the herder who knew animals better than words. For the child who said only yes and no, but meant them deeply. And maybe, just maybe, that means something. Maybe it means that even in the harshness of that world, there were pockets of gentleness. Places where rhythm and silence and devotion mattered more than wit or charm. Let this, then, be a kind of lullaby. A lullaby for the quiet ones, for those whose minds move in spirals, who hum to themselves without knowing, who find comfort in repetition and beauty in things most others overlook. For those who were never loud enough or quick enough, or social enough, but who notice the way the light changes before rain, or how the sheep gather before dusk. Let this be for them. And let it be for you too, if you recognize any part of yourself in these stories. The world today is louder than ever. We are expected to explain ourselves, sell ourselves, perform and impress, and reply instantly to every demand. Noise is rewarded. Silence is mistaken for absence. But long ago, under stone arches and candlelight, in mountain paths and snowy tents, silence was sacred. In that silence, people found peace. They found rhythm. They found God, or if not God, then at least something steady. Something real. So, if you are someone who loves the quiet, who doesn't always know the right thing to say, who feels the weight of the world differently, remember this. You are not the first. You walk a path already walked by many, some of them saints, some scribes, some unnamed, forgotten, but no less real. Their lives are not loud in the history books. But tonight, you've heard them. You've seen their footprints. Imagine a hearth at the far end of a weather-beaten hall. Oak beams dark with age. Smoke slipping upward through a stone throat black polished by centuries of winter. The logs have burned down to crimson cores. Each breath of draft coaxes a fresh little starburst of sparks. We sit in a crescent on rough benches, monks, herders, scribes, and wanderers alike, shoulders almost touching, words unhurried. Outside, night is wide and wind-torn. But here amber light strokes wool sleeves. Here stories settle like cloaks across our backs. A wooden cup of mulled cider passes from hand to hand. No one feels obliged to speak. When someone does, it is softly, as though each syllable were a fragile lamp carried through darkness. First, we remember the boy of Gia and Nia Sidwal, whose garden hummed with bees, and whose spirals blossomed on pages that still breathe. In glass cases far away, we picture Brother Juniper, cloakless in winter because someone else wore it home, leaving laughter in his wake like footprints in fresh snow. We picture the watcher of reindeer, silent sentinel, keeper of hoof beat, alphabets on white tundra. And finally, the ink-stained scribe whose quill outlived his lungs, whose raised dots helped a blind anchoress pray her way through the dark. They sit among us now as ember-bright memories. 4 chairs of honor, each occupied by quietness. Wearing a different face, coals are curious teachers. They glow fiercest just before collapsing into ash. If left untended, they die in silence. Yet with one gentle stir, a buried cinder wakes, breathes, and offers fresh heat. Reflection works the same way. We poke at memories not violently, just enough to let air in so their glow can guide the hours ahead. A shepherd by the door asks, "What lesson do we carry into tomorrow?" Brother Marcus Older, now but still smiling ink, smudged smile answers, only by rolling a fresh quill between fingers. Steady tool, steady pulse. Someone else murmurs Juniper's mantra, "Give, then trust the ripple." Zhenya, grown and weather scarred, taps her rhythm on the bench. Click-clack reindeer counting dot. No one tries to weave these lines into doctrine. They remain glowing. Fragments, like separate constellations, the mind connects only when ready. We acknowledge what we do not know. How many voices were smothered by fear or fire? How many boys with spirals were dismissed as fools, not holy but damned? Silence in history can be gentle womb or cruel shroud. Parchments survive, bodies not. Yet uncertainty itself becomes a plea. Make the present kinder. So our century's margins will not need later scholars to guess whether we offered space or scorn. The library of silence is still being written, one gesture, one accommodation at a time. The wind pushing at shutters tonight carries distant echoes. Subway brakes, cell phone vibrations, market news rising and falling like siege horns. We cannot banish that world, nor should we. But we can smuggle its noise outside for a few minutes and bolt the door behind it. In doing so, we remember that the human nervous system, medieval or modern, still craves interval, pattern, hush. Perhaps tomorrow, in some fluorescent office, you will recall the bell rhythm of prime and terse, and choose to answer emails at measured hours rather than in ceaseless scroll. Perhaps you will protect a child's humming, or trust a colleague's need for headphones, recognizing in them a fellow keeper of quieter clocks. Listen closely. Beneath the hiss of logs, a deeper hum threads the hall. It might be bees from Sidwell's garden, ocean in a shell, blood in the ear. Whatever its source, it sings. Your rhythm is older than ridicule. Your focus is a form of prayer. Your stillness is not vacancy but vigil. If your thoughts loop back on themselves, round and round like juniper carving circles in dust, allow them. One more gentle turn before sleep. Spirals do not need straightening. They contain their own geometry of return. The cup of cider comes to you at last, and in its surface swims a tiny galaxy of firelight. Drink slowly. Taste clove apple, a hint of smoke, then hand it on. This sharing is our final parable. Warmth multiplied by circulation, story strengthened by transfer. Before we part, the abbot invites a single word from each listener, a seed to scatter on tomorrow's fields. Some offer pox, some give, some a simple yes, your turn comes. Maybe you choose to listen. You drop it into the communal bowl where words mingle like embers blown together into one last flare. The fire sinks to gray. We rise, stretch, draw cloaks tighter. Outside, snow begins, or is it starlight thickening? Either way, the air is ripe with hush. At the threshold, Brother Marcus raises the old formula, peace and let every soul turn toward rest. We file out, floorboards creak goodbye. Behind us, someone bars the door, shutting the dark inside where ashes will smolder till dawn. Now your own room returns, maybe ceiling fan, maybe city neon stroking curtains. But for a breath longer, keep the hearth's glow inside your ribcage. Let it light tunnels of thought until dreams arrive with gentle authority. Remember the chain of quiet guardians behind you, ink-stained, cloakless, snow-dusted, candle-eyed. They never asked to lead armies. They asked only for the right to move at the cadence their hearts set, and in doing so they led after all. So, breathe. Inhale through the nose-cool stone, midnight parchment. Exhale warm beeswax, distant sheepfolds. Again, let shoulders drop. Let jaw unclench. Let tomorrow wait its turn. The fire is low. The stories have folded their wings. Outside, the stars ancient, patient keep watch. Sleep now, traveler. You belong to the hush as holy as any monk, fool, herder, or scribe. Whoever traced devotion across the fabric of night. Good night, and thank you for listening. The stars are higher now, the fire is low. Its final embers glow like sleepy eyes, soft and golden. Outside, the night has deepened. The air cooler, the world quieter. Let your thoughts drift with the wind, down the paths we've walked, and into that gentler world where silence was not feared, but welcomed. Tonight, you've wandered far. You've walked beside a boy who learned to say only yes and no. You've shared bread with a friar who gave away his cloak without hesitation. You've knelt in the scriptorium with ink-stained fingers, copying truth line by line. You've followed reindeer tracks through snow and memory. And finally, you've sat by the fire, listening not for answers, but for echoes. You've seen, perhaps, that even long ago, even in a world often hard and unforgiving, there were places for the quiet ones. Not always safe, not always kind, but sometimes just enough. Sometimes a garden, sometimes a herd, sometimes a monastery where silence was prayer and stillness were praised. But before you drift into dreams, let us stay here a moment longer. Let us walk again, slowly, past what we've seen, back to that damp cottage in early medieval England, where a boy sat tracing patterns on a wooden table, silent for 9 long years. Remember the bishop, how he knelt, not to perform a miracle, but to speak a word. Yes, Gia. And then, no, Nia. 2 words, enough to change a life. The world did not need him to speak endlessly, just truly. Now we step again into the olive groves of Assisi. Can you still hear the laughter that followed Brother Juniper's strange generosity? His oddness wasn't a stain, it was a song. One that didn't follow the usual melody, but danced somewhere between the notes. A fool, perhaps, but a holy one. The kind of fool who, in his simplicity, revealed more about God than scholars ever could. And onward, north, into the frozen fields, where reindeer move like shadows and the sky seems too wide for words. An old man, cooking alone, saying little, but holding, within him, the story of every hoofprint on that land. He did not fit into conversations, but he fit into the herd. And that, in his world, mattered more. Then quietly we returned to the monastery. To the boy in the scriptorium, whose letters were prayers, and whose silence spoke louder than any chant. He saw beauty where others saw lines. He brought life to parchment. His pages carried stories, songs, truths, all in silence. And now, as your eyes grow heavier, imagine each of these lives glowing faintly, like candles in distant windows, scattered across time, separate and yet part of the same quiet constellation. A child, a friar, a herder, a scribe, each different, each distant, each a thread in the same soft tapestry of quiet resilience. The world we know today asks for so much, for speed, for loudness, for presence in every space, all at once. But the world of old, harsh though it was, still held these places where difference could hide, survive, even thrive. So, if you are someone who walks to a slower rhythm, who needs space to think, to breathe, to simply be, remember, you are not alone in that. Not now, not ever. There were always people like you, and there always will be. Breathe now. Not deeply, no need to push, just enough. Let your body rest into the bed beneath you. Let your muscles soften, your fingers curl gently, your jaw loosens. You don't have to hold anything just now. The world can wait. Let your thoughts float like dust in the library air. Let them spiral like the patterns the young monk once painted into the margins. The stars, unseen above your roof, are still burning. The fire, now just a red flicker, is still warm. And the path we've walked, though faded, will still be there when you return. So sleep that sleep without urgency. Sleep without apology. Sleep like the reindeer grandfather in his tent. Sleep like the friar after a long walk through the olive groves. Sleep like the boy in the garden where bees hum and thyme grow. Sleep like the scribe, slumped in candlelight, pen fallen from fingers, dream still whispering Latin. You are part of that. Sane story. Quiet. Needed. Enough. Good night. Quiet one. Sleep in peace. Sleep in belonging. Sleep in light too gentle to name.